Hey guys, tonight we drift gently down the slow, shimmering curve of the Nile thousands of years before traffic lights, phone screens, or that weird sticky feeling when you accidentally sit on a gum wrapper. You're in ancient Egypt now. The air is thick with heat and the quiet gurgle of river reeds. A soft breeze brings with it the perfume of crushed myrrh and blue lotus, drifting out from a row of mud brick homes along the water's edge. You pause. The scent is unlike anything you've smelled before, earthy, sweet, spicy, ancient. Someone nearby grinds resins over a smooth stone slab, humming something low and rhythmic. You glance at the mortar-sticky globs of tree sap, flower petals, and a tiny scoop of what might be cinnamon bark or something pretending to be. The scent rises with the sun, and yes, it's lovely. But also you probably won't survive this century. Between heat stroke, hippos, and pharaohs having an off day, you're more of a historical day pass visitor. Just enjoy the smells. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are in Egypt around 3000 BCE. There's no Sephora, no designer brand spritz samples. But perfume. Oh, it's already a thing. You don't just smell good here, you smell holy. Because for the ancient Egyptians, fragrance isn't cosmetic. It's cosmic. You trail behind a priest in crisp white linen, his skin oiled and hair slicked back with a hint of cassia and frankincense. He's heading toward a temple columns carved with lotus blossoms, walls still damp from yesterday's river mist. He carries a shallow bowl of incense, its smoke curling upward like an invitation to the divine. This is no idle ritual. The gods need to smell good things, or they simply won't show up. And trust me, you want them to show up. The sun god, Ra Total Diva, loves a bit of sandalwood. Historians still argue whether perfume began here or in Mesopotamia, or possibly even the Indus Valley. But Egypt made it spiritual. Your nostrils twitch at the realization that scent here is a language, one not written in glyphs, but wafted through temple halls. You duck inside a perfumer's stall. It's dim, cluttered, and has that controlled chaos vibe that says genius at work or just really messy. There are tiny ceramic jars everywhere, some sealed with wax, others open, revealing hardened yellowish goo that might be 100 years old. Maybe older. You sniff? Nope. Definitely older. This early stage of perfumery is equal parts mystery and mess. Resins from desert trees, oils from local crops like moringa and linseed, and if you're lucky, imported spices from lands so far away they might as well be magic. You touch a cracked pot labeled with a cartouche. A finger comes away sticky with something sharp and floral. They call it kai-fi, a blend of honey, wine, raisins, myrrh, and about a dozen other things ground together in rituals that sometimes take weeks. It's a perfume. Yes, but also incense, medicine, even a dream aid. They believe breathing in kai-fi before sleep connects your soul with the gods. No pressure or anything. And here's your quirky tidbit for the night. Some of the earliest perfumes weren't worn, but burned. Like offerings. Because in a world where life is fleeting and the afterlife is forever, it's better to make a good impression up there than down here. That burnt-smelling goo, that's your heavenly resume. Outside, the sun dips lower. Light catches on a river barge floating past. its mast draped in fabric, its crew smelling suspiciously like crushed cardamom and sweat. You take one last lungful of that myrrh-sweetened dusk, and it's almost too much. Not bad, just dense, like history pressing in on you through your nose. And as you wander back through the reeds, your sandals squelching against the muddy bank, you realize something you haven't seen a single written recipe. Not one. Everything is oral, passed from master to apprentice like an incantation. Lose a perfumer, and poof, there goes that blend forever. There goes that blend. But don't worry, we're just getting started. Tomorrow morning, or in the next breath. Depending on your sleep schedule, you'll step deeper into temples where scent wafts like prayer. For now, just breathe easy. The Nile flows. The myrrh burns slow. The sun peeks through cracks in the papyrus blinds as you slip back into the heart of the city. The fragrance of yesterday's ritual still lingers: cloves, honey, and something vaguely resembling old raisins. You're still in ancient Egypt, only now you're peering behind the sacred curtain. Welcome to the lab, or what passes for one of a temple perfumer. This is not your average workshop. No white lab coats, but plenty of linen skirts, bone tools, and ceramic pots warming over glowing embers. The smell, strong enough to make your eyes water and your stomach growl at the same time. One jar steams gently with a mixture of lotus petals and date wine. Another one is bubbling like it knows something you don't. The perfumer nods as you enter, but doesn't stop stirring. He's not being rude, it's just that time matters. Blends must be heated at exactly the right moment, cooled with exactly the right chance, and sealed with an incantation or two. Imagine baking cookies while reciting your will and communing with a solar deity. Easy. What's happening here is sacred chemistry. Every ingredient matters, not just for its scent, but for its symbolic power. Blue lotus represents rebirth, myrrh is for purification, and cinnamon. Well, it's cinnamon. Smells good. Tastes better. Burns like the sun itself when misused, which makes it perfect for temple rites. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians actually understood distillation as we do today. Some say yes, they heated mixtures and captured scented vapor. Others believe they only infused oils and fats with fragrance over long periods, a process called maceration. Either way, it works. You lean closer, sniff a bubbling mixture of juniper and acacia resin, and nearly pass out. Powerful stuff. The walls are lined with scrolls, each marked with symbols that don't so much explain as suggest what's inside the jars. You glance at one papyrus, a scrawled line drawing of a cat sniffing a flower. Adorable. Possibly instructional, or just early meme culture. Now here's a fun fact. Perfumes weren't just made for humans or gods. Cats, particularly the sacred temple cats, were sometimes anointed with oils. Smelling divine, as it turns out, is a multi-species goal. That ginger tabby preening in the corner. She's practically royalty. Outside, merchants shout in the distance. You hear the clatter of donkey hooves, the rustle of date palms. Inside, the perfumer dips a reed into a shallow dish and gestures for you to try. The oil glides onto your wrist warm, smoky, with a sweetness that clings like memory. It's unlike anything you've worn before. Less a scent and more a presence. You blink slowly, dazed. He chuckles. For the gods? He says or something that sounds like it. You're not fluent in Middle Egyptian, but the meaning is clear. Back at the market, you notice how people glance at you now. A flick of the nose, a polite sniff, a raised eyebrow. You smell like the temple, and that means power. Fragrance here isn't just pleasant, it's social armor. To smell sweet is to be respected. To smell like onions and dust. Let's just say you'll be eating alone. You pass by a row of traders hawking everything from spices to cosmetics. One woman offers you a cone of scented fat, a little perfumed pyramid meant to sit atop your head, melting slowly in the sun and releasing fragrance all day. Convenient. Absolutely. Greasy, very fashionable, depends on who's asking. Your quirky tidbit for today. Ancient Egyptians were probably among the first to invent what we'd now call deodorant. Not in stick form, but as a mix of citrus, aromatic oils, and brace yourself sometimes powdered ostrich egg. Historians still argue whether this was more for function or for show. But either way, it beats smelling like sweat and regrets. As the day lengthens, the scent cone begins to drip down your forehead. You pretend not to notice. Everyone else pretends too, which is polite of them. The breeze is soft. The Nile is still glinting like a mirror. And everywhere, people are rubbing, pouring, grinding, and bottling pieces of the divine. You reach a small courtyard tucked behind a jewelry stall. A man is kneeling beside a low fire, heating oil in a bronze pan. He adds crushed mint and something that smells faintly of sandalwood. No ceremony, no chant, just habit. You realize perfume isn't just for temples. It's for seduction, business, funerals, and afternoon naps. There's a scent for everything, including, apparently, war. Yes, some warriors oiled themselves before battle, not for vanity, but to make their skins supple and their enemies confused. You try staying focused when your opponent smells like spiced honey. As dusk falls again, the city sighs. You pass another incense vendor, this one rolling small pellets between his fingers. He offers you a whiff resin, bark, rose. The scent swirls around you, thick and timeless. You breathe it in. You smile. You're starting to understand. To walk through ancient Egypt is to be coated in invisible layers of meaning. You don't just see the world. You inhale it, and tonight, you smell incredible. The stars begin to flicker over the desert horizon, tiny pinpricks of light that seem almost perfumed themselves, twinkling with the calm energy of another warm Egyptian evening. You're still wandering, though more slowly now. The air has cooled, the market has quieted, and your senses have fully surrendered to this new rhythm. Everything steeped in amber tones and hints of sandalwood. Somewhere between your fifth and sixth sniff of the day, you start to wonder, where did all these scents even come from? Not metaphorically, literally. Where did the ancient Egyptians get their perfume ingredients? Because blue lotus flowers aren't growing in every backyard. And good luck stumbling across a wild myrrh bush outside Memphis. Turns out, they had a whole ancient logistics system going. You drift now to the bustling docks of a Nile-side port, let's say the city of Thebes, shimmering in the moonlight. The river is dotted with reed boats and thick trade barges, many of them stacked with bundles wrapped in woven grass, tied with dyed cord. You catch a faint whiff of real cinnamon from far-off lands, maybe even Sri Lanka. Trade is how Egypt got its good stuff. Myrrh and frankincense from Puntaland, so mysterious historians still argue whether it was in modern-day Somalia, Yemen, or a fever dream. Cinnamon and cassia from Asia, brought through tangled routes involving a dozen middlemen and probably a couple of camels with attitude. Balsam from the Levant, and lotus that, thankfully, grows nearby, floating like small, fragrant suns across temple ponds. You stand beside a merchant counting amphorae, His scroll is smeared with oil and ink. He doesn't look up, but you can see the label for temple use only. Very official, very exclusive. Like a Costco membership for priests. Your nose twitches again, this time at something smoky. You glance left and find bundles of pine resin, amber, and crushed juniper berries being unloaded from a barge. You're smelling the backbone of Kai-Fi, the most famous perfume of the ancient world. Some people drank it, others burned it. You're trying not to sneeze as it wafts your way. A fringe tidbit for you. Kai-Fi was so complex it had over 16 ingredients, some say even more. The original recipe includes raisins, honey, wine, frankincense, myrrh, and, wait for it, henna and calamus root. Think trail mix meets incense, aged for weeks, then smoked, then possibly applied to your body and your mood. As night deepens, you wander further from the docks into storage chambers where the temperature drops slightly. Cool clay jars line the shelves, each sealed with wax and labeled with hieroglyphs. You reach out, gently touching one marked with a symbol for delight. It's still sticky, sweet. Somewhere between plums and sun-baked bark, in a back corner, a woman is measuring out portions of scented gum. She moves slowly, methodically, crushing, heating, stirring. She's not a priestess, not a noble, just an artisan. And yet, what she's doing here could easily make its way into a pharaoh's tomb or a queen's hair. Perfume in Egypt wasn't only for the elite, though. Common people used it too, albeit in simpler forms: oils, animal fats infused with herbs, and sometimes crushed flour paste rubbed directly onto the skin. Of course, their access depended heavily on cost. A jar of imported myrrh could cost as much as a small donkey. Imagine choosing between smelling heavenly and, well, owning your own transportation. You linger longer than intended, mesmerized by how organized it all is. Ancient Egypt may have looked like a fantasy kingdom, but its scent economy was real, calculated, and surprisingly global. These docks didn't just smell good, they were the ancient version of a high-end department store fragrance counter. A warm breeze tousles your hair, carrying with it a note of cardamom, faint but exotic. You look up and see a man stepping off a ship, his robe dark with sweat, his arms filled with delicate parcels. He mutters something about Phoenician nonsense and shuffles past. Clearly, perfume diplomacy has its frustrations too. Historians still argue whether Egypt's perfume trade was managed entirely by the royal court or included independent merchants. Evidence suggests both. Some perfume recipes were state secrets, guarded like modern luxury patents. Others were passed down through families, scribbled on ostraca and whispered between generations. You retrace your steps along the dock as the moon reaches its peak. A pair of guards is chatting near a pyramid of pottery. One of them smells like roasted coriander, and you try not to lean in too obviously. It's nice, earthy, like someone who owns a very tidy herb garden and would never ghost you after one date. As you leave the docks, another thought drifts into your head: how perfume played into Egyptian medicine. That's right. These weren't just vanity oils. They believed certain scents had healing powers, not just emotionally, but physically. Garlic oil for chest tightness, mint for digestion, and incense smoke, excellent for warding off evil spirits and mosquitoes. You yawn, just a little. The sensory overload is beginning to lull you now, like a lullaby of crushed rose petals and temple chants. Your feet drag slightly on the stone path. You consider curling up in a crate of cinnamon bark and calling it a night. No judgment. That actually sounds kind of amazing. Instead, you settle onto a low bench beneath a fig tree, its branches laced with small, unripe fruit and moonlit shadows. You breathe deeply. You're beginning to realize something profound in ancient Egypt. Scent wasn't just accessory, it was identity. You didn't just wear a perfume, you became it. And tonight, under a night sky spangled with stars and the faintest wisp of sandalwood, you're becoming something too. The fig tree's shadows stretch slowly as you rise, brushing a few stray leaves from your shoulder. You begin to stroll toward the more sacred part of the city, now past closed market stalls and shuttered bakeries, toward the heart of ancient belief, the temple complex. Because in Egypt, perfume wasn't just about smelling good. It was divine protocol, ritual, communication with gods who, let's be honest, probably had better olfactory standards than any of us. The temple walls rise before you like a silent fortress. You press your hand against one cool stone etched with scenes of offering and procession. A priest passes by in linen so fine it's nearly translucent, carrying a bowl of burning resin. Its frankincense and its thick, citrusy smoke trails behind him like a cloak. You follow, of course you do. He doesn't seem to mind. Inside, the temple is dim, lit only by shafts of sunlight filtered through slits in the ceiling. It smells like time itself, like 100 years of incense layered in the air. Everything is slow here, heavy, reverent. You try not to sneeze again. You step carefully across the worn floor, following the priest to a small side chamber where other priests and priestesses are preparing for the daily ritual of scenting the gods. This isn't optional. It's part of the job. You don't just pray to a moon or Hathor, you perfume them. Daily, with devotion, with exactitude. You imagine your own morning routine and realize it lacks both incense and ceremony. Unless you count that one time you burned toast and whispered apologies to the smoke alarm, a priestess holds up a golden spoon and scoops something thick and glistening into a tiny dish. It's ungun, a kind of scented balm, usually made from fats, hippopotamus, crocodile, or oxen infused with essential oils. You wonder who had to wrangle the hippo for that one. This balm will be applied to the statue of the god, carefully, reverently, as if waking it from slumber. Because the Egyptians believed their gods inhabited these statues, at least during rituals. And what better way to entice a deity than with lotus myrrh and a dash of cinnamon? You catch the scent of kai-fi again stronger now, with that unmistakable sweetness. A priest is stirring it in a copper pot over low coals, humming softly. It's sticky, dark, and smells like night itself, like secrets and fire and figs just on the verge of rotting. In a good way. Historians still argue whether the precise kai-fi formula changed over time or was strictly preserved through dynasties. The recipe recorded at the Temple of Edfu differs slightly from that of earlier papyri. Maybe each temple had its own house blend like boutique perfumeries, but with slightly more crocodiles. You take a seat near a carved column. The hieroglyphs dance in the flickering light. One of them shows a priest holding a cone over someone's head. It takes you a second, but then you remember scented cones. These little wax cones were worn on the head, slowly melting and releasing perfume throughout the day. Yes, it was a thing. And yes, you'd wear one in a heartbeat if it meant smelling like honey and neroli for hours. And here's the kicker. Those cones weren't always just fashion accessories. Some scholars believe they were used primarily in religious or funerary contexts. Others argue they were worn at banquets, weddings, or simply on days when one really needed a boost. You imagine ancient Egyptians saying, "Rough day, where's my myrrh cone?" The gods, of course, had the fanciest cones. The priests made sure of it. You watch one carefully lift a jar from a reed basket. It's wrapped in linen and sealed with a hardened resin cap. He cracks it gently, and a rush of rose and saffron escapes. You involuntarily let out a soft, mmm. The priest smirks. He knows. Beyond the ritual itself, perfume served a deeper theological purpose. It wasn't just about worship, it was about purity. Scent was thought to cleanse the air, purify the space, and make the divine presence bearable to human senses. Without it, the ritual was incomplete. You didn't just see the gods, you smelled them. And you know what? They probably smelled incredible. A low hum fills the chamber as the ritual begins. You watch as offerings are made: bread, wine, incense. The scent rises, curling toward the ceiling, mingling with whispered prayers and the distant echo of a sistrum rattling somewhere in another hall. You sit silently as the ceremony unfolds, the scent of kai-fi growing thicker. Someone near you yawns. You pretend it wasn't you. The smoke swirls slowly, hypnotically. You feel as if your thoughts are being perfumed too smoothed out, softened at the edges. A quirky little footnote: ancient Egyptians even had perfumed boats. That's right. Some ceremonial barges, especially those carrying statues of gods during festivals, were perfumed with oils or had burning incense aboard. Imagine a floating cloud of frankincense bobbing down the Nile. Beats most modern cruise ships. As the ritual ends, the priests file out in silence. You remain, basking in the residual fragrance, letting it settle into your hair, your skin, your memory. There's a stillness here that can't be described, only inhaled. And for a brief moment, you understand why scent was sacred, why it was used to bridge the mortal and the divine. You rise slowly, following the fading footsteps and the last ribbon of smoke. Outside, the stars are brighter, the air clearer. You're starting to suspect the gods do prefer sandalwood. You walk the path back toward the city, your skin faintly glowing with the temple's perfume. No one stops you. No one asks. They can smell where you've been. By the time you make it back through the temple gates, the city is stirring with early life. The air is still tinged with last night's incense, but now there's the smell of wet earth, freshly poured beer mash, and something suspiciously like goat. You decide not to look too closely at that last one. You head deeper into the city, toward the district where merchants work their fragrant magic, where perfume stops being sacred ritual and becomes a thriving business. Welcome to the perfumer's quarter, where alchemy and commerce go hand in hand, and where ancient noses did what modern brands only dream of: sold status, seduction, and a little bit of immortality in a jar. You pass under an awning that droops with woven reeds, and the heat kicks up a notch. Here. The scent is dense, not airy and celestial like the temple, but warm and alive. You smell myrrh, yes, but also cinnamon bark, cardamom, and something distinctly nutty. A young boy runs by carrying a jar the size of his head, and you catch a whiff of spikenard, a heavy, musky root perfume that smells like sleep in antique shops. Behind a counter, a woman is grinding something with a stone pestle. Her fingers are stained dark from the crushed ingredients: frankincense resin, perhaps, or balsam wood. She notices you hovering and waves you over, dabbing a thick paste on your wrist. You sniff. It's earthy, resinous, with a sharp citrus bite at the end. You feel instantly more mysterious and possibly expensive. Perfume in Egypt wasn't just for the gods. It was big business. Everyone wore scent women. Men, children, even animals. Yes, animals. Wealthy pet owners sometimes perfumed their cats. You picture a sleek tabby with a sandalwood-scented forehead and wonder if your own cat would approve. she wouldn't. Historians still argue whether perfume shops like this were state-controlled or privately owned. Some believe temples regulated much of the trade, while others think savvy entrepreneurs carved out their own olfactory empires. Either way, this district hums with commerce. You hear bartering in the background, 3 goats for a bottle of blue lotus oil. Bold move? You drift past rows of jars, each sealed with wax and labeled in careful hieroglyphs. Some oils were single note, just cedar or just myrrh, but the real art was in blending. The Egyptians knew how to layer top heart and base notes long before French perfumers got fancy with it. You tap a jar marked henna and sweetgrass and imagine the marketing copy, earthy yet playful, with a hint of Nile morning dew. Behind a curtain, you glimpse another room cooler, darker. A man is filtering oil through linen, slowly, steadily. The infusion process is meticulous. Base oils like castor or moringa were soaked with flowers or resins for weeks, then strained, then soaked again. You admire the patience required? Your last attempt at making iced tea felt like a waiting game from the underworld. One blend in particular catches your attention. It's sealed in a small alabaster bottle, and the merchant calls it Susanum. Fancy name, This legendary perfume was made from lilies, especially blue lotus, and was a favorite of royalty. Cleopatra herself was said to have worn it, though she also allegedly had a thing for rose oil. Depending on which scrolls you believe, she may have soaked the sails of her ship in perfume so the scent would announce her arrival before the boat even docked. Talk about a grand entrance. You hold the Susanum bottle close, its carved cap warm in your hand. The merchant lets you open it. The scent is floral, yes, but dark too, almost boozy. It's not delicate, it's intense. Like a flower that knows its power and is not here to make friends. Nearby, another merchant is packing clay jars for shipment. These perfumes weren't just local luxuries, they were exported across the ancient world. Greek and Roman elites craved Egyptian scents, and many formulas were guarded like trade secrets. One papyrus even includes a warning not to share the recipe on pain of divine punishment. Perfume espionage, it's real. A quirky note, some recipes included ingredients like ostrich eggshell, crushed malachite, or even goat hair. Whether those added anything olfactorily is anyone's guess. Maybe it was texture, or maybe it was just to keep rivals guessing. A hint of goat fuzz. You whisper, and the merchant gives you a look that says, "Don't quit your day job." Historians still debate how long these scents lasted on the skin. Ancient records claim they lingered for days, even weeks. Modern tests suggest the oils were incredibly potent, almost sticky. You imagine attending a banquet, doused in rose and musk, and 3 days later, your bedsheets still smell like romance and regret. You wander deeper into the district, noting the variety. Some stalls sell oils exclusively for funerary use, stronger blends, meant to mask the less than pleasant realities of mummification. Others cater to lovers or brides, with sweet floral concoctions meant to entice and beguile. There's even a stall where a woman is chanting softly while stirring a copper cauldron of steeping herbs. A love potion, or just another batch of kaifi. You pause outside a small clay-walled workshop where 2 young apprentices are learning the trade. One is measuring ingredients with the precision of a surgeon, while the other sneezes violently into a bag of crushed iris root. You back away slowly, not wanting to be part of that particular blend. The afternoon sun slants through the reed roof, casting stripes across your skin. Your arms are now dappled with scent, one wrist sweet and floral, the other dark and resinous. You feel like a walking incense burner, which, in this town, might actually be a compliment. You sit on a low bench beneath a fig tree and take it all in. The chatter, the smells, the gentle clang of copper lids and pestles. The perfumer's quarter is alive, thriving, and remarkably unchanged in purpose. Thousands of years later, humans still chase scent, still bottle it, brand it, and hope it says something about who they are. You close your eyes, inhale deeply, and wonder what it would be like to blend your own perfume, one that says, "I've met gods, seen the sunrise over a lotus-covered Nile, and know my way around a decent sandalwood. Maybe tomorrow. For now, the air is enough." The fig tree's shade lingers pleasantly on your skin as you rise and drift once more through the dusty alleyways. The air is a soft swirl of aromas, sandalwood trailing from your left shoulder, cinnamon clinging to the hem of your tunic. You feel less like a person and more like a scented offering, which is fitting because now you're heading toward a very specific kind of ritual, the private, sensual ceremony of beauty. Because in ancient Egypt, perfume wasn't only worn for the gods or traded by merchants, it was a personal act, a sensual one. It was how you readied yourself for the world, just like slipping on jewelry, applying kohl to your eyelids, or arranging your wig just so. Dabbing perfume was a sign that you respected the occasion of being alive. Even if that occasion was just walking to the bakery, in the home of a moderately wealthy family, you duck under a linen curtain and find yourself in the quarters of the lady of the house. The walls are cool mud brick, and the light filters in golden, thick with dust motes. She's seated cross-legged, gently massaging oil into her forearms. Not just any oil, this one's infused with blue lotus and a touch of cinnamon. A subtle scent, luxurious but not overpowering, one that says, "I'm at home, but I could conquer a banquet if necessary." Her maid brings over a little alabaster jar sealed with wax. Inside is unguent, thick and creamy, almost like butter left out in the sun. She scoops a dab and warms it between her fingers before pressing it behind the woman's ears. The scent rises with the warmth of her skin. You watch, half jealous, half enchanted. Daily grooming in ancient Egypt was elaborate. Hair, skin, nails, breath all had to be polished. A person's scent was a reflection of their soul. To smell good was to be in harmony with Ma'at, the cosmic order. To smell bad, you might as well invite chaos and frogs into your home. And so, perfumes played a crucial role in the bathroom. Or rather, the cleansing space. Since actual bathtubs weren't common. Instead, servants poured water scented with oils over their masters. Scented cones, those odd waxy things often depicted on top of people's heads in Egyptian art, may have been worn during banquets, slowly melting and releasing fragrance as the night progressed. A literal slow burn situation. Historians still argue whether those head cones were real or symbolic. Some think they were actual perfumed wax meant to melt into wigs. Others suggest they're artistic shorthand for "this person smelled amazing tonight." You picture yourself arriving at a party with a waxy blob atop your head, hoping it doesn't slide off before dessert. The lady of the house stands and moves to a chest filled with small flasks and glass vials. The glass is cloudy with age, swirled with mineral greens and blues. This is the family's personal fragrance collection, each jar sealed and labeled in loving calligraphy. She selects one marked mandrake and honey, lifts the stopper, and breathes in with closed eyes. She smiles. Memory, emotion, time all contained in scent. You remember a moment from earlier, the smell of kaifi wafting through temple halls? The connection becomes clear now. This isn't just about smelling good. Perfume is memory. It's identity. It's how you carry the sacred into the mundane. Even the poorest citizens would anoint themselves with whatever herbs or oils they could manage. A good scent was a form of dignity. Nearby, her husband prepares for a meeting. He selects a darker, muskier scent, something with myrrh and juniper, maybe a dash of cassia bark. His sandals are polished, his wig set in place, and the final touch is scent behind the ears and wrists. Because whether you're sealing a grain deal or bribing a priest, it helps to smell like confidence and spice. A little further into the home, a young girl is giggling as she sneaks a dab of perfume from a jar clearly marked Mothers Only. The maid doesn't scold her. Instead, she helps her apply it properly, tapping behind the knees, at the collarbone, and even a tiny bit on the soles of her feet. The girl beams. Perfume is an inheritance, a rite of passage, a way to say, you too are becoming someone. And let's not forget the makeup table. Yes, there's eye kohl and red ochre for cheeks and lips, but scent is always present. Often, cosmetics were blended with perfumed oils because who wants to wear eyeliner that smells like charcoal when it could smell like frankincense and lime blossom? You glance out a window where the streets glint in the sun, and a thought strikes: these oils are thick, tenacious. They aren't like the fleeting sprays we know today. Ancient perfumes didn't just whisper, they clung. You might still smell like honey and musk long after the party was over, long after your sandals came off, long after your head cone melted and stained your wig. And here's the quirky bit: some lovers wrote poems about perfume. One verse describes sneaking into a room filled with lily oil and being drunk on her next scent. Another compares a woman's breath to the smell of kai-fi at dusk. Sensual, sure, but poetic hygiene. 2. You begin to wonder whether they used pickup lines like, "Are you wearing susinum?" Or is that just divine radiance? The family gathers for a meal, dates, bread, lentils, and roasted duck. As they eat, their scents mingle like a private symphony of olfactory notes. Cinnamon, fig, iris root, and sweet wine. This isn't just dining, it's atmosphere. You wonder how often guests left remembering the scent more than the food. Historians still wonder how personal perfume recipes were passed down. Was it mother to daughter, written in scrolls, or shared with trusted servants? Some argue that scent was part of a woman's dowry. You picture a young bride opening a chest of oils and whispering, "These smell like my grandmother's garden and my aunt's favorite temple." You move to the doorway again, back into the light. The breeze lifts the edge of the curtain, and you smell the neighborhood, every household contributing to the air jasmine here. Henna there. Maybe a rogue waft of garlic from a not-so-distant stew. But always, always perfume. Even now, thousands of years later. The essence lingers. Somewhere. In the dried pores of ancient jars. In the folds of mummy wrappings. In the pages of a dusty medical papyrus. You can still almost smell the echo of Egypt. And that echo follows you as you step into the next chapter of the journey. You wander out from the cool shade of the household, the echo of those perfumes still soft on your senses. But the air shifts again, this time warmer, dustier, laced with something sharp and bitter resin, bubbling in a cauldron. You follow the scent like a sleepwalker, and it leads you to a low, clay-walled workshop tucked between two bustling market lanes. This is where the real magic happens, not divine or romantic, but sticky, smoky, and entirely human. Here, ancient Egypt's perfumers, called scent makers or chemia, work with the focus of surgeons and the flair of artists. There are no white lab coats, but there are stained linen tunics, soot-darkened fingers, and shelves stacked with ceramic pots and beaten copper tools. A fire glows in a small brick hearth, heating a thick pan of oil, likely castor or moringa. both excellent at absorbing scent without turning rancid. You duck inside just as someone adds a chunk of frankincense resin to the mix. It sizzles and hisses like a cranky cat, releasing a ribbon of rich, piney smoke that coils upward and catches in your hair. There's no hood vent here, just a tiny window and a lot of blinking. The scent fills your nose and then your whole head bright, holy, slightly spicy. It smells like prayer. Ancient Egyptian perfumery wasn't just about mixing flower petals into oil and hoping for the best. No. This was science meets art, meets slow cooking. It could take weeks, sometimes months, to produce a single batch of high-quality scent. And when the recipe was especially complicated, you guessed it, more months. Possibly some cursing involved, or a small offering to Hathor for inspiration. You watch as one of the perfumers, let's call him Neferu, leans over a slab of stone and begins grinding spices with a pestle. Myrrh, cassia bark, a touch of cardamom. Every so often, he stops and tastes a bit with the tip of his finger. Not because he's hungry, but because his tongue is sharper than his nose. In fact, some perfumers were trained tasters, a strange but true job requirement. Historians still argue. You hear the head perfumer mutter under his breath, whether cassia works better steeped or dry. He's muttering to himself, but you nod like you understand. Cassia is tricky. Too much, and it smells like burned cinnamon toast. Too little, and it disappears into the base oil. Perfume was chemistry, trial and error, and a surprising amount of personal judgment. And yet there was structure. Recipes existed. Some were passed down within temple schools, guarded like sacred scrolls. Others floated around the markets, traded like gossip. One of the most famous blends was called Susanum, a rich, heady perfume made with blue lotus, myrrh, and a base of animal fat or oil. It was rumored to cause lightheadedness in its wearers, either from the fragrance or from the price. Quirk alert: one recipe demanded boiling the ingredients for 10 days straight, during which a single sneeze from the cook was considered bad luck. Which might explain why these workshops didn't allow cats. Despite Egypt's well-known feline obsession, another famous perfume, Mendesian, named after the city of Mendes in the Nile Delta. This one was a spicy, musky blend, favored by high-ranking officials and anyone trying to smell like power without actually bathing daily. You inch closer to a table lined with jugs and scoops. The air is thick and humid from the heated oils, and you notice that your own skin now carries a faint trace of something unfamiliar, perhaps cinnamon and pine resin. You're becoming part of the process. One of the perfumers turns and hands you a small wax tablet. "Keep notes," he says with a smile. You nod solemnly and immediately draw a doodle of a very judgmental ibex instead. It's not all high-concept fragrance, of course. Some batches are utilitarian. There are body oils for laborers, foot balms for soldiers, and mosquito-repelling mixes that smell like spicy mud. Not glamorous, but essential. In fact, there's evidence that one recipe included crushed juniper berries and donkey dung to ward off insects. You wrinkle your nose. Ancient bug spray effective, but socially risky. The perfumers laugh. "We use it on the guards," one says, "especially the ones who snore." You ask them how they know when a perfume is finished. One shrugs. "It tells you." Another taps his nose. "When it makes you remember something you never lived through." It's done. Poetic. Sure, maybe even a little dramatic. But you get it. Scent is memory's shadow, lingering where logic doesn't reach. And what about color? Perfumes weren't just aromatic. They were often tinted. Yellow from saffron, red from henna, green from crushed herbs. These hues made each blend feel more alive, more magical, and probably made spills on white tunics less noticeable. Practical and mystical, all in one jar. You glance around at the shelves and spot something unusual. A tiny alabaster bottle carved with hieroglyphs. It's sealed with a cone of beeswax and wrapped in linen. The perfumer explains, "This is a funeral scent, made for a priestess, to accompany her to the afterlife." Suddenly the room feels quieter. You hold the jar in your palm and feel its weight, its story. This perfume wasn't made for flirtation or feast. It was made for eternity, for a place where scent and soul could travel together. You step outside again, the wind brushing against your skin and carrying the faintest trace of lotus and oil. The market bustles around you, but you feel like you're floating above it, slightly dazed, entirely fragrant. And in your satchel, that wax tablet with a doodle and maybe a memory of something you never lived through. You drift farther from the perfumer's alley, letting the humid breeze roll across your cheeks. But instead of heading back to the temples or the palace, you're now drawn somewhere stranger, a place less elegant but far more human. The public market is still humming, but you turn into a quieter path, one paved with worn limestone and shaded by date palms. You're headed toward the homes, the kitchens, the hearths where scent was not a luxury, but a necessity, a comfort, and sometimes a weapon. You arrive at a modest courtyard home, its mud brick walls sun-baked to a dusty tan, and a thin wisp of smoke curling from a small rooftop vent. A woman is pounding something in a wooden mortar, slow, rhythmic, determined. She glances up with a smile, her wrists dusted in ground herbs. Rose petals, she tells you, and a little coriander. For the laundry, you nod solemnly, as if you too often perfume your socks. This is where you learn that perfume wasn't just for the elite in ancient Egypt. Even ordinary folk, scribes, merchants, weavers kept little jars of scented oil tucked away, not because they were planning a fancy dinner, but because life in the Nile Valley, it smelled intense. Between the heat, the livestock, the fish markets, and the ever-present possibility of a surprise sandstorm, smelling nice became more than vanity. It was sanity. You duck into the house and are immediately hit by a wave of aroma. Not overpowering, just layered. There's the sweetness of dried figs simmering on the stove, the tang of onion chopped moments ago, and something warm and earthy incense still curling from the altar in the corner. You recognize frankincense again, and a hint of lemongrass, mixed with whatever someone spilled on the floor last week. Home, sweet home. A small boy races past you, giggling, and his shoulder brushes yours. He smells faintly of almond oil and something sticky. Possibly honey, possibly mischief. His mother calls after him and returns to dabbing a cloth with what she calls kitchen perfume, a mix of water, vinegar, and crushed herbs to wipe down the stone countertops. Who needs bleach when you've got time and ancient practicality? And yes, while temples and elite homes had the fancy imported stuff, everyday Egyptians were surprisingly clever with what they had. Want to freshen your linen tunic? Sprinkle it with rose water and leave it in the shade? Want to calm your nerves after a long day chasing goats? Rub your feet with a mix of mint and fat? Want your lover to notice you across the courtyard? Try a drop of orange blossom oil, or just loudly pretend to drop your laundry in front of them. Either works. Historians still argue whether these homebrew mixtures were passed down formally or improvised on the fly. One school insists there were household grimoires, tiny recipe tablets kept near the pantry. Another claims the knowledge was entirely oral, passed from mothers to daughters, often while elbow deep in bread dough. And speaking of bread, you're handed a slice fresh from the oven. It's warm and smells faintly of anise and sesame, with just the ghost of cinnamon. Apparently, some households added perfumed oil to their baking, not for taste, but to make the house smell inviting. Clever and effective. You accept a second slice. In the bedroom, you notice something strange above the headrest, a cone-shaped object stuck to the linen sheet. Perfume cone, the woman says, noticing your gaze. For dreaming. She explains how small cones of scented animal fat were left near the head or even worn on special occasions. As the fat melted slowly with body heat, it released perfume like the world's first sleep diffuser. If your dreams included blue lotus and sandalwood, well, you had a good night. And it wasn't just for adults. Even children had their own scents, usually milder and gentler rose, almond, a bit of myrrh. Babies were sometimes rubbed with scented oils to calm them or mask unpleasantness. One fringe theory suggests a specific blend was thought to keep evil spirits away, or nosy grandmothers. Hard to say which was more dangerous. Outside again. A neighbor leans over the low wall, waving a bundle of reeds dipped in citrus peel and vinegar. For the flies. She grins. You're starting to realize that perfume wasn't just about beauty. It was about function, defense, memory, joy, and survival. One man passing by carries a small bottle looped on his belt. He swears it's for headaches. A dab of mint oil on the temples and boom relief. Or possibly just a placebo effect strong enough to impress the gods. Either way, the man seems relaxed enough to nap in the sun with one sandal off and zero regrets. At the edge of the neighborhood, an older woman beckons you to her garden. It's small, just a few rows of herbs and flowers, but the scent is dizzying. Basil, chamomile, sweet marjoram, and, blue lotus again. She plucks a few petals and crushes them gently in your hand. You can carry this, she says softly. Smells like yesterday. You walk on with the petals still pressed between your fingers. The scent fading slowly but refusing to vanish. You think of the way homes hold on to smells, how scent turns bricks into memory and rooms into warmth. Not grand, not regal, but real. At the far end of the street, a boy is painting hieroglyphs on a scrap of pottery. He looks up and says, "Do you think the gods can smell us?" You pause, then nod, because if they can, tonight, they'd probably smile. The sun is lower now, casting long shadows across the courtyard walls and tinting everything in golden, sleepy hues. You follow a foot-worn path that leads away from the homes and toward a quieter part of the city, a place where air moves slower, voices fall softer, and time itself seems to take a nap. You're walking toward the burial grounds. Not to worry, no jump scares here. Just the gentle, ceremonial hum of an ancient culture that believed death was merely an extended vacation, with excellent luggage, perfume. You'll soon discover, played an essential role not just in life, but in death. Because when your eternal soul is expected to travel to the afterlife fully intact, you do not want to show up smelling like onions and camel. You reach a small mortuary temple at the edge of the necropolis. The stone walls are cool to the touch, shaded by acacia trees whose branches hum quietly with insects. Inside, it's dim, just a few slivers of light spilling through carved vents, and it smells solemn. Not unpleasant. Just layered. Resin. Aged wood. Something sweet but ghostly. Like the perfume of memory itself. A priest in linen robes moves with deliberate grace, stirring a thick, amber-colored salve in a clay bowl. He nods at your presence but speaks only to the salve, murmuring what might be a prayer or possibly just a complaint about how hot it is in here. He dips a small brush into the mixture and begins painting it across the wrappings of a mummified body laid before him. Yes, you're now watching ancient embalming in action. And yes, they absolutely used perfume during the process. One mainstream historical fact: perfumed resins like myrrh, frankincense, and cedar oil were essential in embalming rituals. They weren't just symbolic. These substances actively helped slow decomposition, mask unpleasant odors, and bonus, kept bugs at bay. If your idea of a good afterlife includes being fly-free, these priests had your back. You lean closer, trying not to inhale too loudly, and catch the bittersweet scent of bitumen. Yes, actual tar. Some embalming mixtures used it liberally, which helped preserve the skin in that leathery, movie mummy way. Not great for cuddles, but definitely effective for eternity. But here's where it gets stranger. Some fringe theories suggest that certain elite mummies pharaohs especially may have had entirely custom perfume blends mixed into their wrappings. Think of it like an eternal signature scent. Historians still argue whether one mysterious embalming formula discovered near the Valley of the Kings included ingredients imported from India or possibly even further east. A prehistoric perfume passport, if you will. As you move deeper into the chamber, you see shelves of tiny alabaster jars, each sealed with wax or clay. Some are labeled with glyphs blessing oil, skin balm, lotus preparation. These weren't for everyday use, these were sacred, meant to accompany the soul across the stars, like packing your best lotion for a cosmic spa day. In one jar, a sticky black paste emits the unmistakable tang of pine and lemon balm. Another smells like licorice and earth. A third, rotten plums. Not every blend aged well. You pause in front of a ceremonial table where offerings are arranged: bread, beer, dried fruit, and yes, bottles of perfume. Some are shaped like animals, others like delicate flowers. The dead, it turns out, were expected to eat, drink, and smell divine forever. No pressure, and just in case the spirit got forgetful, perfumed oils were often poured onto the burial linens during the funeral procession, soaking the wrappings and seeping into the tomb. You imagine being a mourner trailing behind that scent trail grief, softened by the smell of saffron, cypress, and distant spices. One priest nearby lifts a conical censer and begins to swing it slowly, letting incense rise in fragrant clouds. You recognize the smoky sweetness of Kefi, a legendary Egyptian incense blend, used in temples and tombs. Kaifi was said to calm the soul and please the gods. Its exact recipe, still a source of debate. Some believe it had as many as 16 ingredients: honey, wine, raisins, cinnamon, juniper, and more. Others say there were different versions depending on time of day: morning Kefi to wake the gods, evening Kefi to soothe them. You wonder if there was a version for when the gods had a rough day and just needed a foot rub. You step quietly through an open archway into the burial vaults, where rows of sarcophagi rest in eternal neatness. The scent here is more subtle, less resinous, more mineral. But something remains. A faint note of lotus clings to the air. Perhaps from a garland long since withered, or a jar cracked open by time. You can't be sure, Needham, but the air remembers. It hits you then, how layered this culture's view of scent was. Perfume wasn't vanity, it was identity. It told the gods who you were. It told the living what mattered to you. And it told the dead that they were still remembered. As you turn to leave, The same priest presses something into your palm. A small linen sachet tied with golden thread. Inside, the faintest scent of blue lotus and cinnamon. For peaceful dreams, he says. Before returning to his work, you walk back into the twilight, sachet still warm in your hand, and wonder not for the first time how a civilization so ancient could feel so oddly familiar. Their fears, their rituals, their desperate need to make a good final impression. You glance at the horizon and realize the desert air smells different now. Like something distant and sacred just exhaled. The quiet dusk unfolds around you like a soft linen robe, stitched with stars and stretched across the desert. You've left the tombs behind, but the weight of incense still clings faintly to your skin, myrrh. Cinnamon, and something smoky you can't quite place. Maybe a little mystery is good for sleep. You follow the Nile's edge now, where a soft wind cools the sweat along your collar. Palm trees sway like they're nodding off themselves, their fronds whispering lullabies. Across the water, flickering torches illuminate the outline of a noble villa. Not royal, but definitely someone who owns more cats than a rescue shelter. You head that way, invited by the gentle rhythm of music and conversation. Because tonight, you're about to see what perfume meant for those who weren't embalming anyone but still took scent very, very seriously. You enter through a tiled courtyard where dancers move in slow, hypnotic circles. Their shoulders shimmer with oil. Their hair, piled high, is dusted with golden powder. And on each of their heads, yes, a little waxy cone of perfume, melting slowly down like a scented candle with commitment issues. These perfume cones were surprisingly common in festive events, made of animal fat mixed with fragrant oils. They'd soften from body heat and gradually release aroma over several hours. Imagine a party where instead of spraying perfume before arriving, you just wear it and let it melt directly into your scalp. Stylish. Questionably practical. The music here is mellow a harp, some finger cymbals, and the murmur of gossip. You ease into a seat beside a shallow reflecting pool, and a servant offers a small glass of wine that smells like raisins and sunburn. You sip. It's historical. A woman seated nearby offers you a small alabaster jar. Kaifi, she says, then adds with a shrug. Probably. Or yesterday's leftovers. You lift the lid, and a swirl of honeyed spice hits your nose. It's heady, warm, with a kick of something almost medicinal. You blink and feel like you just got a polite slap from a cinnamon stick. One mainstream fact. Kaifi wasn't just incense, it was also used as perfume. Even medicine. Egyptians believed it could cure breathing issues, ease anxiety, and yes, make you more appealing at parties. Multitasking at its most fragrant. Nearby, a scribe and his wife laugh over a papyrus scroll that turns out to be a shopping list. You catch glimpses of the ingredients: lily oil, sweet rush, henna resin, and strangely, goose fat. You try not to ask. Maybe it's a recipe. Maybe it's a prank. Historians still argue whether perfume cones actually existed outside of art. You've seen them on hundreds of tomb paintings. Sure, but no physical examples have been found. Some say they were metaphoric, others think they've just decomposed. Either way, you're watching one slowly ooze down a woman's braid right now. So let's call that evidence enough. As the night deepens, musicians shift into slower rhythms, and the mood dips into that post-dinner lull where everyone is too full to dance but too polite to leave. A servant fans you lazily with palm fronds soaked in rosewater, and the air picks up a romantic note, sweet, but not cloying, just enough to make you imagine moonlight as something you could wear. You start to notice something. Nearly every person in this courtyard smells different. Some sharp and green, others deep and smoky. It's not a coincidence. Scent was personal, customized, layered. You pass a young woman adjusting her necklace and catch the scent of henna and cardamom. Beside her, a man with silver rings smells like cedar and leather scrolls. Perfume wasn't gendered here, it was expressive, like jewelry or hairstyle, a form of self-branding long before influencers existed. You overhear someone complaining that the royal perfumers raised their prices again. Apparently, Blue Lotus is scarce this season. Another guest insists that imported Syrian oils are overrated and that nothing beats fresh moringa from the Delta. It's the ancient Egyptian version of arguing over essential oils at a yoga studio. Fringe tidbit: there were actual houses of perfume in ancient cities, laboratories where blends were tested, refined, and guarded like treasure. Some even suggest recipes were passed down like sacred texts. Apprentice to master, generation to generation, with maybe a little side-eye if someone got too creative. You step away from the chatter and wander toward a shaded arcade where a perfumer is holding court. He's older, with a beard streaked in gray and hands stained with oil. Before him are dozens of tiny vessels, each one open, each one glowing softly in the torchlight. He sees you, smiles, and beckons you closer. You've smelled the end of life, he says. Now let's find a scent for waking dreams. You watch as he dips a delicate reed into one jar, then another, blending a drop here, a swirl there. You catch notes of mint, lotus, sandalwood, a touch of vinegar. He dabs the final mixture onto a cloth and waves it gently under your nose. And just like that, you're back in a temple courtyard at dawn. Sandal straps brushing against dew-wet flagstones. Papyrus rustling softly behind you. One inhale. And it's not just perfume, it's a memory you didn't know you had. The perfumer chuckles. Not bad for a drop of sweat and flower juice. You leave with a tiny sample tied around your wrist, trailing its scent like a silk ribbon through the darkness. The Nile whispers beside you. The stars blink, unfazed. And somewhere behind you, the music continues, a lazy song of oil, fire, and laughter drifting into the desert air. You drift onward through the quiet midnight landscape, the little cloth at your wrist still carrying the delicate echo of that perfumer's dream blend. The scent shifts as you move, first minty, then woody, then something like the peel of a fruit you can't name. You walk more slowly now, your steps soft, guided by moonlight smeared across sand and stone like spilled milk. Up ahead, the terrain changes. Gone is the bustling courtyard of perfumed dancers. In its place, rows upon rows of neat, low buildings, warehouses, workshops. You've wandered into the industrial guts of ancient fragrance where sacred oil becomes commodity, and artistry gets sweaty. You duck into one of the larger workshops. The door's ajar, the lamp inside flickering. Inside, a young apprentice leans over a broad, flat stone, crushing petals with a wooden roller. His hands are stained pink, his nose smudged with something syrupy. He doesn't even glance up, just waves you in with a stained elbow. "Watch your step," he mutters. "That's spikenard. The smell in here is a lot. Overripe fruit, sharp resins, something faintly like goat. Not quite the spa experience you expected, but this right here is the grind, literally. The stage before beauty, the place where flowers meet fire. Mainstream fact. Ancient Egyptian perfumes were often made through maceration, soaking plant materials, flowers, herbs, even bark and warm oils, sometimes for weeks. Then straining, storing, and repeating. Other methods included enfleurage and distillation, but they were rarer here. Time and heat were the real alchemists. You spot clay ovens near the back of the room, where oil gently bubbles in terracotta pots. The apprentice grumbles about the humidity, flicks a petal off his sleeve, then gestures to a series of baskets stacked with raw ingredients rose petals. Frankincense, henna leaves, crushed juniper, and hold on a small sack labeled onion extract. He catches your look. It's for a foot balm. He shrugs. Not all perfume goes on the neck. Touché! A second apprentice burst in, holding a cracked jar and panting. The Blue Lotus shipment is late again. The boat broke an oar? The first apprentice rolls his eyes and mumbles something about switching suppliers. You see logistics the oldest complaint in commerce. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians imported more perfume materials than they made domestically. Some say local plants were enough. Papyrus, moringa, and acacia were plentiful. Others argue that Egypt's obsession with luxury meant importing from places like Punt and Lebanon was essential, even excessive. Kind of like buying strawberries in December just because you can. The master of the workshop finally appears a woman this time, draped in a linen tunic stained with saffron. She's inspecting a fresh batch of oil by candlelight, swishing it in a shallow bowl like a wine taster. She notices you, nods once, and flicks a drop onto your hand. It smells immediately of green shoots and wet clay. Then after a pause, sweet almond and crushed blossoms. It smells like spring. But not your spring. An older one, less filtered, with frogs and wind and a pyramid just starting to rise in the background. You ask without asking what it's made of. She answers mostly marjoram and a little desert air. You sit nearby and watch the apprentices filter their soaked oils through linen cloth. It's a slow, rhythmic process, like making tea for a very fussy pharaoh. Each jar is sealed with beeswax, labeled in ochre script, and placed in cool, shadowed niches to mature. Some jars are bound in reeds. Others are carved with protective spells. One has a drawing of a cat and, weirdly, the word "don't touch" in large letters. You decide not to. Fringe tidbit. Ancient Egyptian perfumes had shelf lives. Some were designed to get better with age, while others had to be used quickly or they'd turn rancid. Rich clients sometimes stored them in underground cool chambers to slow decay. Refrigeration? Ancient edition. Outside. A delivery donkey brays impatiently. Two boys unload bundles of fresh herbs and dried flowers wrapped in palm fronds. A list pinned to the wall includes items like sweet flag, cinnamon bark, and grape must. One corner reads urgent Ki-Fi repair. You resist the urge to ask what perfume needs repair. As the night stretches on, the master mixes one final batch of heart blend. She calls it something balanced, calming, used for dreams and quiet ceremonies. She lets you watch a drop of sandalwood, a dash of lotus, a twist of citrus peel soaked in wine. She places the finished blend in a small ceramic amulet, presses it closed, then ties it around your neck. For when you forget the smell of now, she says, and vanishes behind a curtain of drying rosemary, you step outside into cooler air, the scent of crushed marjoram still on your palm. The Nile gleams to the east, and somewhere far off, a scribe drops his ink brush and sighs. You breathe deeply, and for the first time all night, the air feels almost quiet, like it's full instead of empty. The wind carries with it whispers of something ancient, part ritual, part recipe. You keep walking, and behind you, the workshop breathes like a creature half asleep, warm, fragrant, alive. You follow the scent trail eastward now, deeper into the folds of twilight, where torchlight flickers against crumbling temple walls and the hush of sacred ground draws close. The workshop has faded behind you, its steam and mortar replaced with something more spiritual. Even the sand here feels different under your feet. Cooler, more patient. You round a bend and suddenly, there it is, the Temple of Hathor, not the main one. Mind you, this one's smaller, tucked into the crook of a lesser-known district, shadowed by overgrown palms and watched by a sleepy ibis perched on a column. But it pulses with the same reverence, same magic. You step softly, your nose already twitching from the rich mix of scents pouring out incense. Oils, burning herbs, a holy cocktail, mainstream fact. Perfume in ancient Egypt wasn't just for smelling nice, it was fundamentally sacred. Temples used scent to communicate with the gods. Rituals required offerings of carefully blended incense, burned oils, and sacred smoke to please deities or carry prayers. No worship without wafting, basically. At the threshold, a priest in linen robes lifts a hand to stop you. He studies the amulet around your neck, the one gifted by the master perfumer, and nods once. Apparently, you've been vouched for. He gestures you inside. The air is thick. Not heavy in a bad way. More like a dense velvet drape of fragrance. It clings to you warm, musky, ancient. The walls are painted with scenes of floral harvests and oil pressings, of gods inhaling curls of smoke rising from altars. A low chant hums through the temple like a background melody. You spot rows of shallow bowls filled with ingredients placed like offerings: myrrh, resin, cinnamon, cardamom, juniper berries, even frankincense already smoldering on hot stones. It's like someone raided an apothecary and threw a celestial dinner party. A scribe kneels beside a stone tablet, carefully copying a recipe. Yes, a recipe. Not for dinner, but for perfume. Kaifi again. The sacred blend of blends. This one includes 16 ingredients and takes several days to make. It must be fermented, dried, crushed, soaked, and then burned, not worn. Smelled by gods, not mortals. Historians still argue whether Kaifi was standardized or varied wildly between temples. Some believe each region had its own secret version passed down like a family lasagna recipe. Others think priests followed strict formulas, like celestial pharmacists. The truth probably sits somewhere in the middle, as it usually does. You walk slowly through the chamber, pausing by a statue of Hathor, goddess of love. Music. And yes, perfume. She's carved with a smile, a sistrum in one hand, a small vessel in the other. Her scent offering is immortalized in stone. You swear, just for a second. The incense in the air curls toward her. A priestess approaches. She carries a small ivory box and opens it to reveal a thick, dark balm. She offers a tiny scoop on your wrist. You rub it gently and the smell hits immediately heady, warm, and hypnotic. Honey? Raisins? Maybe wine? A touch of cedar and citrus peel. It smells like dusk settling into velvet, like something you'd wear to dream better dreams. She whispers that it's a special Kaifi used only during the Feast of the Beautiful Reunion, when Hathor is welcomed back from Nubia in a grand celebration. They anoint the statue with it, burn it during chants, and even mix it with wine for the final toast. That's right, perfume wine. History's weird. Wonderful cocktail hour. Fringe tidbit. Some scholars believe certain Egyptian perfumes, especially those used in rituals, were psychoactive. Ingredients like blue lotus or mandrake could induce mild euphoria or altered states. Not quite ancient LSD, but enough to make temple smoke a little more magical. You sit cross-legged near a brazier and watch a priest slowly add grains of powdered resin into the fire. Each puff of smoke that rises is deliberate, choreographed, like an offering in slow motion. You try to focus on the scent, but your mind wanders, floats, rests. Maybe that's the point. Behind you, faint footsteps shuffle on stone. You turn and see an older priest lighting candles along the corridor wall. He's humming. Nothing important. Just a low, tuneless sound. But it feels like part of the ceremony. Like he's perfuming the air with notes instead of oils. You close your eyes. The chant, the hum, the smoke, they blend until there's no space between them. You're not just in a temple anymore, you're in a lullaby made of fragrance. The walls breathe. The air holds memory like a sponge. When you finally open your eyes again, the brazier has dimmed to embers. The priestess nods and hands you a clay vial. She doesn't say what's in it. She doesn't need to. You tuck it into your belt and rise slowly. Every movement saturated with the stillness of sacred scent. Outside, the night is cooler, quieter. You can still smell the kaifi clinging to your clothes. A donkey brays far off. Someone's roasting fish by the riverside. But for now, in this space between prayer and perfume, everything feels suspended. You look up at the stars. Ancient Egyptians believed their gods rode perfume smoke into the heavens, a fragrant chariot of prayer. And tonight, as the last curl of incense fades, you swear you see something dance across the sky, sweet, slow, and scented. Your feet carry you back through the temple's threshold, out into the dusty coolness of the alleyway where the scent of sacred smoke slowly gives way to the far more practical aroma of baking bread and camel dung. Quite the nose palate cleanser. You roll your shoulders. You're not done yet. There's still a missing piece to this fragrant puzzle the Nile's role in it all. You wander toward the river, drawn by the sound of slow waves brushing against reed boats and fishing lines tugging in the dark. The Nile isn't just Egypt's lifeline, it's her perfumer's assistant. Every blossom, every resin, every chunk of bark that ends up in a kaifi mixture or a noblewoman's alabaster jar has, at some point, made the watery journey upstream or down. Mainstream historical fact, the Nile functioned as the highway of ancient Egypt. Everything moved on it: goods, grain, gossip, and yes, perfume ingredients. Without it, transporting delicate myrrh or heat-sensitive lotus oils across 1,000 miles of sand would be a logistical nightmare. But with boats' easy glide, you step onto a small dock where bundles of papyrus sway gently in the breeze. A reed canoe, painted with a chipped blue eye of Horus, is being unloaded. The boatman, a wiry, sun-worn fellow, nods at you and gestures toward the crates he's stacking. You peer inside and see what looks like lumps of hardened tree sap. Myrrh. Probably. Smells like spicy root beer mixed with dusty citrus. You ask, and he nods again, more eagerly this time. Not just myrrh, also labdanum and storax? You blink. Storax? That's a Mediterranean tree resin. He chuckles and taps the side of the boat. Came all the way from Byblos. He mumbles, and there it is. Quirky tidbit of the evening Egypt imported a staggering amount of its perfume ingredients. Sure, they grew blue lotus and mint and henna locally, but many of the prized scents, frankincense, myrrh, cinnamon, galbanum, were imports, often hauled across thousands of miles in camel caravans or by sea. It's like your favorite indie fragrance brand sourcing lavender from Provence. Ancient perfumers were nothing if not global. You sit beside the boatman on a crate and watch the river. He lights a small pipe of sweet herbs not keefy, but close, and exhales lazily. You inhale just enough to feel the scent wrap around your head like a sleepy scarf. You ask how long he's been running these routes. He shrugs. Since the hippos were gods, he says, eyes twinkling. And right on cue, a pair of eyes blink from the waterline. Yep, that's a hippo. You freeze. It snorts and sinks with a gurgle. Just another river commuter. Historians still argue whether the perfume trade was driven more by religious demand or royal vanity. Some argue the temples needed it constantly. Others say pharaohs hoarded rare oils like gold. But whatever the motive, the logistics were deeply entwined with the river. You watch as another boat glides in. This one stacked with delicate alabaster jars, each sealed with beeswax and labeled with tiny ink glyphs. You lean closer to one and spot a symbol for lotus and another for the sacred flame. Maybe it's one of those heat-activated oils that releases scent only when warmed. You resist the urge to pocket it barely. Behind you, someone calls out. It's a boy, maybe 10, waving a bundle of fresh-cut reeds dripping with moisture. He offers one to you and grins as if he's just handed you the answer to everything. You sniff it faintly sweet, vaguely green, and not at all perfumey. Still, it triggers something in your brain. The reeds are used in distillation, especially in crude versions of steam extraction. You vaguely remember reading that somewhere. Not quite modern chemistry, but clever. Egyptians used sand-heated pots and condensation traps to extract essential oils. Perfume technology, ancient style. You stand and stretch, staring out over the water. The boatman is humming something now, low and tuneless, like the priest back in the temple. There's a rhythm to it that matches the sway of the boat ropes. You get the feeling he's sung it 1,000 times. As the sky deepens to indigo, you follow the docks inland again. Somewhere nearby, a merchant is yelling about cinnamon bark. Another is boasting about a shipment of cedarwood just in from Lebanon. Someone else has set up a night stall offering tiny vials of oil guaranteed to make the gods love you, or at least tolerate you. Honestly, fair marketing. You drift past them, smiling. Every scent tells a story. And this city is basically a library without a card catalog. Just as you're about to turn toward the perfumer's quarter again, a soft voice calls you over. An old woman sits by a glowing brazier, roasting what looks like bits of gum resin over coals. The air around her smells warm and slightly floral. She offers you a seat, and without asking, drops a pinch of resin into your palm. It crumbles between your fingers like old sugar, and the smell bursts out sweet, smoky, familiar. You whisper, "Is this Kaifi?" She nods once, eyes reflecting firelight, and then she leans in, conspiratorially. Everyone thinks perfume rises to the gods. She says, but sometimes it brings them down to us. You sit back, letting that settle. The river murmurs, the hippos grumble. Somewhere, a priest lights a new offering. You breathe deeply. Hold the scent in your lungs and let it tell you something sacred. Or silly. Or both. Either way, it's perfume, and it's divine. You blink slowly, the old woman's words lingering like the resin's perfume in the back of your throat. Brings the gods down to us. That's a pretty bold claim for something you can spill on your tunic. But maybe she's right. In ancient Egypt, perfume wasn't just scent, it was presence, transformation, communication. You aren't just wearing fragrance, you're inviting eternity to sit down next to you and smell your neck. As you meander through a narrow street lined with half-shuttered stalls and flickering lanterns, you catch a whiff of something heady and floral. Not the sticky, resinous aroma of temple incense, this is different. Lighter, more intimate. You follow your nose and end up before a tiny doorway, half hidden behind hanging fabric and twined vines. Inside, a woman in linen robes is carefully stirring something in a bronze bowl, the soft clink of her pestle blending with the hum of cicadas outside. She gestures you in without looking up. No names, no chatter, just perfume. Mainstream historical fact: Egyptian perfumery wasn't limited to priests and pharaohs. Artisans, especially women, played an enormous role in crafting personal fragrances. Some worked in temple complexes, others in private workshops, catering to nobility or anyone with coin and good taste. Recipes passed down through generations weren't just preserved, they were refined, reimagined. You watch as she adds drops of oil, maybe sweet almond, maybe moringa, and a powdered substance that glitters like crushed petals. The scent blooms immediately. You inhale too eagerly and almost sneeze. She laughs, eyes still focused on her work. Too fast, she says. Let the smell find you first. Good advice, honestly. She offers you a dab on your wrist. It's light, playful, like someone whispering a joke in a garden. You're not sure what's in it, but you detect hints of blue lotus, maybe a touch of cinnamon bark. The kind of scent that might turn a boring political marriage into a tolerable one? Possibly. Fringe tidbit. Egyptians sometimes used animal-based fixatives in perfume like musk from civets or even whale ambergris washed up on foreign shores. That's right. Somewhere out there was an ancient perfumer rubbing a blob of sea vomit into jasmine petals and charging a royal premium for the privilege. You try not to think about that as the current perfume warms on your skin. You compliment the scent, and the woman finally meets your eyes. For dancing, she says simply, and goes back to work. And suddenly you remember you've seen dancers in ancient art, twisting barefoot through courtyards, perfume cones melting on their heads and scenting their braided hair. Yeah, perfume wasn't just religious, it was sexy. Sorry, sacred adjacent. Historians still argue whether perfume cones were real or symbolic. Some say people actually wore wax cones that slowly melted throughout the night, drenching them in aroma. Others claim the cones were just metaphors like emojis in fresco form. But either way, the association stuck perfume was elegance, pleasure, celebration. Back outside, you pass a young man trying to impress a scribe by reciting a love poem. He's absolutely butchering it. Your breath is like sandalwood and pickled dates he offers. To which she replies, romantic, in a tone that could strip paint. Points for effort, though. Turns out, scent was a huge part of flirtation in ancient Egypt. Love poems often described a lover's scent as divine, or likened a beloved to aromatic plants. You imagine trying that in modern times, babe. You smell like sacred balsam and ethically sourced frankincense. Might work on the right crowd. You stroll on, stopping at a mural painted on a garden wall. It shows two women seated beneath a tree, surrounded by lotus blossoms and birds. One holds a jar with a trailing spiral painted above it, the symbol for scent. Not words, not music. Scent. You try to imagine their voices, their laughter, their perfume shared, passed, gifted. And you think about how scent lingers longer than memory. How you can catch a single note rosewood, cardamom, cinnamon, and be dragged halfway across time and space. Suddenly you're 10, or you're in love, or you're at your grandmother's kitchen and it's raining outside. Ancient Egyptians knew that. They bottled memories. They gave scent to gods and to lovers, to temples and tombs. They scented their children, their bed sheets, their letters, their hair. Even death wasn't allowed to be odorless. No, even mummies got the deluxe spa treatment. Not that they asked for it, of course. You pass a noblewoman's tomb under the waning moonlight, its carved facade softened by age. One inscription catches your eye. It's brief, probably overlooked by most. Just a name and a jar of perfume carved above it. Not a title, not a husband's lineage. Just the jar. Maybe that's how she wanted to be remembered, not as wife or daughter, but as the woman who smelled like heaven. There's something so powerfully human about that. All the pomp and divine destiny. And still, what mattered was how you smelled when you entered a room or a tomb. You wonder what scent your life would leave behind. Burnt toast, old notebooks, maybe jasmine and late-night anxiety. The stars blur overhead. You pass a closed garden, filled with night-blooming jasmine and sacred basil. The air here is thicker, slower. You walk through it like honey. Each breath another note in the symphony of sleepiness that's slowly enveloping your limbs. A temple bell tolls in the distance. Not loud, not commanding. Just a sleepy reminder that even the gods have bedtime routines. You find a bench near a trickling fountain, a breeze rustling the leaves around you. For a second, you swear you can smell every part of this place, the worn cedar of the bench, the sour sweetness of fermenting dates, the musk of the soil, the ghost of someone's perfume from hours ago. And just like that, the ancient world doesn't feel ancient at all. It smells familiar. You sit still for a while, just breathing. The fountain whispers. The night insects chirp their lullabies, and the perfumed air swirls around you like a silken shroud. Everything feels suspended time. Thought, gravity, even your heartbeat slows, syncing with the rhythm of this ancient place. And then, like a final chapter waiting patiently to be read, you remember something. The alabastron, that little perfume jar you saw at the start of this journey, tucked away behind a polished glass in a sterile museum case, suddenly feels like an old friend. You understand it now, not just its design or function, but the soul of it, the purpose. That jar wasn't made for storage, it was made for memory, ceremony, seduction, maybe even rebellion, mainstream historical fact. The alabastron, named for the stone it was often carved from, was one of the most iconic perfume vessels in ancient Egypt. Sleek, narrow-necked, designed to keep precious oils from evaporating. Some were glass, some stone, others ceramic. Many were exquisitely decorated. Some were buried with their owners, still sealed. Their scent trapped inside like a genie in a bottle, waiting for millennia. You picture one being passed from mother to daughter, or handed from a priest to a new initiate. Maybe dropped in a moment of passion, or hidden behind a brick in a lover's wall. Fringe tidbit: one alabastron was once discovered with remnants of a fragrance researchers believe was a blend of myrrh, cardamom, and wait for it, cooked dates. Yes, even their perfumes had snack-like undertones, because what better way to summon a god than by smelling like divine dessert? Historians still argue whether such luxury items were accessible beyond the elite. Some believe lower classes developed simpler, more affordable perfumes using local ingredients. Others suggest fragrance remained a strictly upper-tier indulgence, tightly regulated like wine or linen. But artifacts suggest a more nuanced truth, one where scent slipped through boundaries, clung to couriers and concubines alike. You rise slowly from the bench, legs reluctant, head a little heavier than before. Not unpleasant, just pleasantly weighted, like you've been wrapped in warm cotton. You wander toward the edge of the garden, where a small shrine sits cradled by hedges and moonflowers. There's no one around, just a clay bowl on a stone pedestal, still faintly smoking. Out of curiosity, you lean in and inhale. It's faint, so faint you almost miss it. But beneath the incense lies something soft, floral, impossibly fragile. Maybe blue lotus, maybe a drop of rose oil. It hits your senses like a lullaby, then disappears before you can confirm what it was. You sigh. Of course, the final tease. You walk on past sleeping dogs and slumped guards, past temple pillars that cast long shadows like sleepy giants. The city has grown quiet, less alive, more mythical, like it's holding its breath. There's one last street to pass through, a narrow corridor flanked by perfumers' shops, now closed. Their signs painted on wood or etched in plaster glow faintly in the torchlight. You spot a symbol again and again, a small spiral above a jar, the symbol for scent, but also for spirit, for offering, for soul. And just like that, you understand what the Egyptians always knew: perfume wasn't just cosmetic, it was metaphysical. It didn't just cover the body, it completed it. You weren't truly ready for the day, or for love, or for death, until you'd anointed yourself with something scented. You reach the end of the street and pause. Behind you, the ancient city breathes in sleep. Before you, the path fades into desert silence. You glance once more at your wrist. The perfume is nearly gone. Only a faint trace remains. But that's enough. You close your eyes, letting it carry you not back to the museum, or your bed, or your busy life, just deeper into stillness, into warmth, into scent. Wind down 300 words, and now your footsteps slow until you're no longer walking but floating. The city fades gently behind you, like mist lifting from a warm bath. The perfume, that last sliver of ancient sweetness, lingers a little longer, then sighs away like a lullaby's final note. The air softens, time dissolves. Around you, the sounds dull into velvet, no longer cicadas and bells. Just the hush of night embracing itself. The ground feels like silk, and every breath you take is thick with memory and calm. You're no longer in Egypt. You're nowhere. You're everywhere. Suspended gently in the dark like a drop of oil in water, your body loosens its grip. Fingers unclench, shoulders settle. Your thoughts, which once sprinted ahead like curious cats, now curl up quietly inside you. Content to nap, this moment is yours. The past is resting. The gods are quiet. Even the fragrance once bright and bustling with life is now curled gently around your senses like a silk scarf in a breeze. You're safe. You are the jar, and the perfume inside you is peace. So sleep now, not because you've reached the end, but because finally, nothing else is waiting. Everything is complete. Every step taken. Every scent explored. The story will still be here when you wake. But for now, let it fade with you. Good night.